everyone, and welcome to Mer Herosner podcast, episode 4. I'm your host, Vic and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Balyan.
Hello, everyone.
Dive deep. Thanks for cutting me off, Mike.
Hey, have some fun on the show.
Where we dive deep into our great Armenian history and discuss different eras, kingdoms, topics, and great people. How you doing today?
Fantastic.
Yeah? Have you had your coffee?
I might need some more.
It's Saturday, yeah.
I might need some more.
Well, we have another great show today where we will be talking about Armenian architecture and arts in the Middle Ages and medieval times. We have the pleasure of Dr. Christina Maranci, who has joined us via Zoom to talk about these topics and help us learn more. Thank you for being part of the show. How are you doing today, Dr. Maranci?
Great. Oh, shut love. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be on the show.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. We want people like yourself, educators, to, the goal of the show is to spread education and learn about our history and all different forms of history, not just, kingdoms, but especially arts and architecture is so important. It's part of who we are as people.
Absolutely.
Now, those of you who don't know, Dr. Christina Maranci is an Armenian American researcher, writer, translator, historian, and a professor at Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts. She is also the author of The Art of Armenia, an Introduction, and Armenia, Art, Religion, and Trade in the Middle Ages, which you can and should order on Amazon. Dr. Maranci, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your background for our audience to learn about you?
Thank you so much, Vic. I'm glad you said I was Armenian American. It is a misconception. I sometimes hear that I'm Italian and, love to the Italians in Italy, but I'm actually not. And my name sounded Christina Maranci. Really, actually, I think there are Italians with that name, but that is not me. So my name Maranci or Maranci is a shortened version of Maranjan, and it is shortened because of the Turkish name change laws of the early 1920s, where my father's family grew up and where they had a leather tanning factory. So that's my background. I'm both sides Armenian and Bolsai on my father's side, but originally from Sivas, Sepastia, and then on my mother's side from Erzurum and Şabinkarahisar. So, that's my story. My grandparents were genocide survivors, and that's part of who I am. And so I am both a scholar, but I'm also a member of the Armenian community and going through the war now as everybody else is.
Yeah.
So
it's funny you say that. Last episode, I think I pronounced it like Italian. I went Maranci. Who said that she has Italian?
I think it was Gevod.
Gevod said that you might have Italian background or something. I was like, all right, well, we'll see when we meet her. We'll find out.
At this point, I feel like I kind of am Italian. I'll just say I'm Italian. Like sometimes I'll just say, okay, I have an alter ego that's Italian, and I'll just start pretending I'm Italian, and I'll speak Italian, and I'll just be Italian. But I'm not.
I mean, we all have the benefit of having that I or Y. You can kind of shorten it with a couple letters.
I mean,
it works out.
When you talk about letter changes, my last name is Aslanian, but originally it was Arslanian. There was an R, Arslanian, and they removed the R to sound more Turk Aslan. The Aslan.
That's so interesting.
So and it's funny. My grandma used to call me Aslan Bala, which means Aslan is lion. So. But I mean, I think lovely. There's so many stories like that of people had to change their last name or move the letters around. But let me ask you a kind of follow-up question to that was, what made you decide that this is the direction you wanted to go as far as like learning Armenian history of the arts and architecture, and eventually leading to you teaching about this at Tufts University?
Definitely. Thank you for that. it was a very circuitous route. I loved art as a kid, and where I grew up. So first of all, I loved art, and I was Armenian. I am Armenian, but I didn't put the two together. I still am Armenian. I'm not Italian. I didn't put the two together. I just love drawing and stuff, but also because I think in most American sort of public school curricula, you don't get history of art. It's not a subject that's taught. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even realize you could do that. And I have a kind of brain where I'm not good with abstraction. I like to, if I'm learning history, I'm not good with dates. I really want to see. I want to see pictures and I want to see material. I want to have that kind of close, real interaction with something. And then the history comes alive to me, or the politics or the religion or whatever it might be. So when I took an art appreciation class in this community college in Connecticut. And I just fell in love, and it was Italian art, actually. Getting back to Italy, but the way that art history was able to capture so many of the realities of the past in a way that was totally different from history books, the way you usually told a parade of events from this to that and this war to that war. So anyway, I really started at, Armenian art, not from the point of view of Armenia, but from the history of art. And so when I transferred and I went to Vassar College, and I studied medieval art of Western Europe, Gothic and Romanesque architecture. And then slowly, I met some wonderful scholars like Nina Garsoyan and Thomas Matthews, specialists in Armenian medieval art and history. And then I found myself kind of angling more east and studying Byzantine art, and then resting in the sphere of Armenia. But it was very much sort of starting from the discipline of art history, but coming to it, from my own background being Armenian. The two kind of came together, I would say, in college and in grad school. I really am so glad I had that careful art history training, learning how to study images, not just appreciate, but to study them rigorously for what we can learn about the past. So that those things kind of came together. It certainly wasn't as if I started out, knowing this is what I wanted to do at all.
Wow. It's interesting how it kind of took a life of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it still does, but I'm so glad that, and, let me say too, that it wasn't always easy because frankly, I would say, when I was in grad school, everyone said, oh, don't study Armenian art. You're never going to get a job. You'll get a job if you study Italian Renaissance art or modern art or Gothic cathedrals, but Armenian art, there's just no jobs out there. But what happened with the field is that people started realizing there's more to art history than just Italian art. We keep talking about Italy, but there's more to it than that, and that there are all these other cultures that aren't studied or thought about as much. So as art history changed, so my opportunities grew to be able to, so I got, my first job was teaching medieval, but I was able to not just do Western medieval, but I could do Byzantine, I could do Islamic, and I even got to do Armenian art. Then, fast forward to 2008, I got this wonderful endowed chair to teach Armenian art at Tufts. But none of that would have happened if I had listened to people who said, oh, don't do Armenian because you're never going to get a job, right? That's,
What made Tufts to actually offer a course like that? What was there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so the reason that they even have it is because the course, but also the endowed chair, is because of the good offices of an Armenian, Lucy Dermanuelian, who is alive and well and retired. But she was an amazing person who actually thought up the idea for the position, which is an endowed chair. She raised the money, and she was the first occupant. And so it's the Arthur H. Dadian and Arati Öztemel Professor of Armenian Art at Tufts University. But she did it all. She hustled her way to create this position, which and it's the only endowed Armenian art chair outside of the Republic. Yeah. So it's very special. But I owe that absolutely to her and to the fundraising she did, and to all the sponsors. It's one of those wonderful stories where Armenian immigrants come to this country and realize they want to do something to perpetuate, the culture and to create an atmosphere where people learn. And we see that in these endowed chairs across the country. So that was a wonderful thing that was done. Yeah. Really smart too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And now is the class, is it mostly should I say hodgkars, Armenians? How big is the class? Is there interest, people drawn to it?
Yeah, so that's so interesting that you should ask, because in fact, so when I started, so I teach, I'm also department chair, I should say. So I don't teach full load, but I teach my Armenian art, Introduction to Armenian Art, every fall. And that number has grown to 121 students, which is a lot for Tufts.
Wow.
And most of them are not Armenian.
So I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. So a lot of people who are just interested in the subject, I think, again, it's because there's this curiosity of art outside of the usual, sort of European sphere. Nobody's heard of it, and they're curious. And also, again, I think now with the war, it's more in the headlines, and that's sort of another way that. And then I think it matters how you teach a subject. So I like to make it really engaging. I bring up all kinds of pop culture references. We talk about, so I want to make the subject as inviting and welcoming as I can. At the same time, I often say that Armenian art teaches itself. All you have to do is show these amazing things that if you've seen this reaction of not people who aren't Armenian or don't know about the culture. They're just amazed. This stuff is so beautiful and it's so rich that it's like, it really sells itself, if I could put it that way. So, so I have 120 students entering this fall, and I'm excited. But at this point, I would say a small fraction are Armenian, or half or a quarter. Now we're seeing more of that. But many are not and are just interested.
Yeah, that's good.
It's amazing. That's so good.
As we're going to dive into our topics, the first question I wanted to ask you is, since we started this podcast, Mike and I have spent a lot of time before every episode doing research and trying to learn as much as possible to put out the right information during our episodes. You being a researcher yourself, how difficult has it been to find information from ancient artwork?
You know what? So much has to do with kind of developing a nose for it. And when you start, you feel like, and I often tell this to my students, when you start, you feel like, oh, there's nothing to say. But the more you do it, the more you realize the ways to learn. So I pay really close attention to inscriptions on buildings, because I know those inscriptions can tell me about people and about concepts and about theology and about political realities and about the landscape and about just whole mental landscapes. And so, but that's something you develop over time, I would say. But you do kind of, you start to also now, I'm old and I've been doing this a long time, but you start to realize how much the older I get, the more I realize how much we can learn. And it's much more than I ever thought. It's just a question of sharpening your tools. And so, for example, I've written a lot about something that, what could you possibly, a sundial. So Armenian sundials, these are, essentially, instruments engraved on the walls of Armenian churches on the south facades. You see them go to any Armenian church almost, and look in the, historical Armenia, and you see a sundial on the south facade. And so, that's really interesting. So what can it tell us? It tells us about the history of science. It tells us about astronomy, but it also tells us about, how people saw the world, how they measured their days, and also the relations between the time and things like hourly prayers, which is what those sundials were kind of indicating. There's so many interesting ways of approaching what might seem like very sort of matter-of-fact phenomena. And so that's something that, I learn more about every day as I do this work, Yeah. So there is so much. And the beautiful thing is that with Armenian materials, there is so much. We have close to 40,000 manuscripts, each one written by an individual or individuals who had their own thoughts and ideas and perspectives and recorded those things in the manuscripts. Same for the buildings. That impulse to inscribe and to record can be found on the very earliest, objects and buildings that I study.
Well, we've learned going back to the, all the way to the
third century, even when as far back as like the third millennia. BC.
The QAnon form. Yeah. It's amazing.
Exactly.
But as far as when you talk about inscriptions, and my question was more, do you hit almost like roadblocks when you're trying to find this information? How difficult is it to get access? Like,
you mean logistically and stuff? It's not hard at all. In part, and I say that right now, it's a pandemic, and in fact, a lot of the libraries that I would normally use are closed. But no, there's so much that's been published. So one of the wonderful things about the impulse to record and stuff that you see in the medieval Armenian world is that it continues in the modern world. So you think about like 19th century Armenian scholars in Venice or Bolis who are creating journals in which they're recording the presence of churches and recording inscriptions on those churches, and they're publishing it. And now those journals are online. You can find them. All you need to do is plug in the year and you're there. So no, it's not hard. I think though you need to sort of know where to look, but there's so much online. And I have to say the National Library of Armenia has done amazing things, making so much available. We have all the Soviet scholarships. So much of that is scanned and online.
Are they translated though?
No, it's all in Armenian.
Okay.
Yeah, so you need to be able to do that, the Armenian work. But it is there so that, if you're interested and you have Armenian, it's a reason to learn Armenian too, frankly, because if you can, it opens up just huge horizons. I think the hardest thing for me, and this may be maybe what you were thinking about too, is, to do the field work on Armenian monuments. That can be hard depending on where it is you want to go. And so, working on Meren, which is in the Turkish Republic, modern day Turkish Republic, in the military zone, that wasn't easy. So that's hard. Trying to do field work on sites that are forbidden or difficult to access. For me, that's the hard part. But it's
Now, do you
that's
agree
the fact of life.
That all this information that's out there that's in Armenian, that I always say, all the episodes I've mentioned, I feel like in Armenia, of course, for us, it's good to learn Armenian and try to read and do your research, but I think these also need to be translated. So the rest of the world, English being obviously the dominant language, to learn. I think that's what's lacking from the Armenian side. We need to do this.
Have a translation project. I think that's right, Vic. I think it would be, you're right. I mean, not everybody's going to have the motivation to learn Armenian. And, I think we see, for example, with the Artsakh, situation where if the evidence and the documentation were more readily available in English and, have it be very good, like authoritative scholarly English, that would really have helped or help. It is a roadblock, but that's not something I really had thought about much, because I just figured, because I know Armenian, but you're right, it would make it more available. And for me as a scholar, it would make it easier to teach sometimes when I have grad students who, are going to have to get through a long colophon of a manuscript, so a long scribal note or an inscription.
And that's one of I mean, that's one of the reasons why we do this show in English. I mean, we can do it in Armenian, and obviously we'll have more access to professors and that from Armenia especially, or Artsakh. But our goal is, English to be able to not only reach our generation that's growing up here in the U.S. or other countries that speak English, is for non-Armenians to learn about this. And you'd be surprised in these. Well, this is the 4th episode. In 3 episodes are following with non-Armenians has grown. Like I can't
That's
even.
Which is.
That's
I
great.
mean, I don't want to personally say it's a shock, but it kind of is. Whenever I've had some of my friends from abroad, non-Armenian friends from abroad, let's say throughout Europe, Australia, even, contact us and say, "Hey, we're listening to your stuff. This is amazing."
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it really is cool. But
it's important,
the main goal about the English, especially in this country, and me and Vic have talked about this quite often prior to even doing any of this stuff, was, there's a lot of people, especially the younger generation here, that seems to have kind of fallen out of touch with our history. I'm sure you've probably come across this on the East Coast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have it. It's rampant here. I mean, we have a massive population of Armenians. So, it's the best way to reach out to everybody.
I think that's wonderful. The way you're putting it. Yeah. I mean, even in my own family, I'm not going to name any names, but, not everybody is like studying this stuff. And I would say, for me, I come to the problem of educating non-Armenians largely through the art. That is an incredible way. I often say this, like, it's a way to introduce people who don't know the language, something so essentially, something that is so Armenian. I mean, again, you show the churches, you show the manuscripts, and my hope is always that some of my students will go on and learn and study, and they do, and I'm really happy to see that. But I think the art is a wonderful way to do what you all are doing, with your show in English. It's a way of kind of giving that immediate access to a whole world. And so I think that's borne out too by something like the Met Show, which was incredibly popular with all kinds of groups and communities. In part because it was right there. It was easily accessible. You see the faces, you see the buildings, you see the landscape. You don't need to know Armenian to feel those things.
Well, okay, so that'll lead me to my question. We know throughout our history we were excellent at metallurgy, stonework, woodwork. I wanted to know what type of influences, if there were any, or were we innovators in what we do during the Urartuan times and moving forward into the Middle Ages. I'm sure there's plenty of influences, from early on through the Egyptians, the Sumerians, and then eventually with some of the Islamic takeovers in the Middle Ages and some of those influences. If you want to maybe shed some light on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, this is so particularly the pre-Christian period, which is what you're talking about, from, all the way from, which is so rich in historical Armenia. Let me just preface that by saying that I think that the pre-Christian study of pre-Christian Armenian territories is incredibly complex in ways that the Christian period is not, because we don't have, of course, the Armenian alphabet. That's one thing, but the other thing is that the scholarship that is produced on this is extremely technical, and I can tell you. And so you have on the one part this really technical anthropological and archaeological scholarship, archaeologists talking to archaeologists. And then you have really interested amateurs who are great and do wonderful things and put websites up. And so you have that, but you don't have a kind of, for the average person who wants to learn, and get an authoritative voice on pre-Christian Armenia. There isn't a whole lot of kind of easily digestible, authoritative work out there, in my view. And I say this in part because in writing my book, The Art of Armenia, the first chapter is on the ancient world. And it was the hardest chapter of all to write, because there simply wasn't that kind of general access information that was documented with footnotes and connected to, archaeological sites, that, all that good stuff, with carbon dating and all that wonderful scientific investigative tools. So already I'll just say that it's hard to study it, but at the same time, that material is incredibly old and it's incredibly rich. And the excavations that have been happening and are happening in the Republic, Bronze Age sites, for example, and earlier, are showing amazing things. What it shows to me And again, pre-Christian Armenia can touch some hot buttons for various people about, where they think their culture is coming from.
Yeah, it really can.
Yeah.
You should listen to our previous episode.
Yeah. So right. So, but for me, what's so interesting, and I speak here not as a specialist in ancient art, I'm a medievalist, but for me, what's so interesting is how the material culture of pre-Christian Armenia is both clearly connected to neighboring cultures. I think of Assyria very obviously, but also then the Persian world, connected to, but also distinct from. So it's both. And not only that, ancient Armenia, in ways that you don't see elsewhere, actually demonstrates multiple different cultures converging and kind of doing things in Armenia. So for example, in ancient Armenia, we see Hellenistic style, statues alongside Persianate style, objects. You see those two, it shows very clearly that we can't put Armenia into a box. We can't say, oh, it's part of the Mediterranean classical world, or, oh, it's part of the world of Iran. It's kind of doing a lot of different things. And that is why this material is so important to study, because it's not tidy. It complicates our understanding of the ancient world the way no other tradition does. And that's a wonderful lesson to teach anybody, that it's not simply, oh, we have Greek and Roman statues, we have Persian palaces. No, it's what we see in Armenia is really demonstrates that. It's a wonderful example, a unique example of a culture that has a number of different traditions and that are kind of merging, but it also gives us a chance. I'm just going to jump on another thing. It gives us a chance to say that just because we can see the same ideas in Urartian art objects that we see in Assyria, that doesn't mean that one or the other was copying, right? So, for example, why would somebody in Urartian era Armenia want or make an object that looked like it was from Assyria? If you stop worrying about whether or not it's derivative and you start asking, why would they want that? Were they competing? What were they actually thinking about doing? Things get so much more interesting. And actually, some of the newer archaeological projects and publications, I'm thinking of Lori Khachaturian's work, are studying, for example, Persian era Armenian excavations and thinking about connections with Persepolis and with Iran. They don't just say, oh, Armenians were copying. They were actually doing something very special and special to them in an Armenian satrapy to the north. And so I think what's so interesting is that archaeology, art history, those fields are changing. We don't think in terms of like origins and derivative anymore. Things are much more interesting and complicated now, and it really allows us to rethink all this rich material that we have. But I really want to emphasize that, the Armenian, pre-Christian Armenia is extraordinary for how it breaks our kind of preconceptions of what ancient art should be.
Yeah, because we were limited to so many things. I mean, I myself, growing up, any of the history that you're taught in school was Greek and Roman, Greek and Roman,
Yeah.
Greek and Roman, and that's about it. I always mention this on the podcast, is I went to Armenian schools growing up, and even the Armenian history that we were taught, which really wasn't as in-depth as what we're trying to do here, and then listening to some of your speeches and whatnot, it wasn't this, it was still all referencing Greek and Roman style art. We didn't talk about anything else as far as I could remember.
Yeah, right. And what we can do now is say, what is Greek? What is Roman? What does it mean for an Armenian king to want to see, a Greek play, or want to have in his temple a Hellenistic style statue? What was that person thinking? And how does it allow us to see Greek art in a different way? Because it does. It means that we can, those people who've been studying, Hellenistic art for ages and ages, can think about it in a new way if they think about its reception and its modification and its appropriation in the context of Armenian elite culture. So there's so much potential to rethink everything we know about the ancient world, you know,
of course,
through looking at Armenia.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the way Armenia was positioned back in, you know, that it was almost geographically.
Yeah.
You know, they were kind of like the guard where to pass through, you know, so that's why you see these connections with the Greeks and the Syrians and so much.
And hence why one of the questions, I mean, whether it could ever be answered or not, like, were they innovative? You know, it's like, is there information out there that shows that maybe, hey, you know, since the way the doctrine tells us is Greek and Roman, and everything derived from that, apparently, but it's not the case. Hence why you kind of wonder, you start asking the question. I know I myself have as an artist. It's like, were we innovative in any way, shape, or form? I mean, it looks like we were, you know, especially in that region.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question. I think whenever an artisan, you know, sort of is confronted with an object or a site or a monument and works with it, that new things happen, and I think that that if you think about also not just the finished product, okay, maybe you have like you know, a kind of a harness piece in the shape of a stag, and there are these beautiful examples of that in from pre-Christian Armenia. But then if you think about how those objects were used, you know, so some of them had little bells attached. So when you drove your horses, you would hear sounds, and you would see these wonderful stags, you know, these bronze stags. So that the whole experience of this work, it was, and that's another piece with pre-modern art, that these were objects that were meant to be used and experienced. They weren't meant to be sitting in a vitrine or hanging from a wall. So they were part of your whole kind of an extension of your material, your physical experience. So when you add that to the picture, that helps us further complicate this idea of like model and copy, or innovation versus, you know, derivation. And so that's important too. And I think it's wonderful to be able to imagine what the pre-Christian Armenian experience of these, can you imagine what it was like to go to Garni and to see this amazing site? Like, what would that have meant to a pre-modern? Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the bath is beautiful. Those mosaics in the bath at Garni is also a wonderful example. What did it mean to the people who used it? What was it like to sit in a bath with water and look down and see those mosaics? So in that landscape, there's so many interesting questions to ask. Yeah.
Oh man, it's just like this thirst to learn so much.
I know.
That's I think that kind of also leads in, like, prior to my question is, I want to talk about hodgkars.
Okay.
As we, you know, all know, we have amazing carvings of hodgkars throughout Armenia and Armenian highlands in general, which some have been destroyed, obviously, to falsify our history by, you know, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Now, was this carving art forms something that was around prior to our acceptance of Christianity, which then evolved into what we see so abundantly throughout the region?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question, because what it asks us to do is to think again about, you know, how do we understand hodgkars, and how do we understand the relationship between hodgkars and what came before them? I would put to you this. There are some really interesting examples of Urartian steles that have been carved with crosses. And carved with crosses and clearly they were carved with crosses like during the Christian period. It's not like that before. So that these are reused steles, and they were reused and Christianized by adding cross designs. Now, are those hodgkars, or are they Urartian steles that are reused? And I think the question is an important one as we consider the problem of the development of the hodgkar. The hodgkar, for if you know, the textbook definition is, this is a form that developed in the 9th century. Our earliest inscribed examples are from the 9th century. There's one from Garni, for example, and there's one from Artsakh from that early period. And so we tend to talk about the development of the hodgkar from that point onward, and then we look at regional variations and we look at chronological developments, et cetera, et cetera. But if you start thinking, well, what did the first person who carved a hodgkar, what was Khachatur thinking about when he or Mariam maybe, what were they thinking about when they carved? And one can imagine that if you are that person, you had in your own mental landscape the example of uprights from the past, like those steles. We know that those steles survived and were thought about. Those Urartian steles were thought about and wondered about by Christians. So it's a tricky question to answer. I don't think there's a biological imperative of Armenians to create uprights and stick them in the ground. That's my view. But I also think that being in that landscape, being part of that landscape, if you're an Armenian and you want to create something, that would have come to your mind because you had a kind of a memory, kind of social memory of these Urartian steles. And a lot of them, and there are examples that are at sites like Zvartnots or Echmiadzin. So or in Van, where there are a whole bunch of these steles that were recarved and inserted into churches as spolia. We call it spolia, recycled Urartian steles forming parts of these churches. So, and then we can talk about medieval chronicles that, Christian Armenian chronicles that talk about these steles. So I think what we have to do is think about memory as well as everything else, memory, the past in the past. How would a hodgkar carver have thought up the idea of a hodgkar might very well have to do with what his or her memories were of and what they thought of as old and sacred, because it might have been something like an Urartian stele,
Yeah, it's always fascinated me because during my abundant visits about 10 plus years ago, I unfortunately haven't been there since 2010, but there was a time period over a 5-year span where I visited quite often. Mm-hmm. Just going to some of the museums and just seeing in church backyards or whatever, just on the grounds, you see some of the unbelievable hodgkars. Again, since I was a kid, I hadn't been there, and it blew me away. I think that's what really grasped me, back to my roots, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I have this massive fascination about it. I've talked to Vic about it a bunch of times. I'm obsessed with hodgkars. I am absolutely obsessed with them.
Yeah, I get it. I am too. They are extraordinary, and the way they develop. If we want to talk about unique and innovation, I think that's where there's nothing like that. No. I know the comparison with Irish high cross is often made, but hodgkars are, physically, they're so meticulous and so sophisticated, and I really, I remember. I think we all think we know hodgkars, but when I was writing, it's like that's such a mistake. Anything that stops you from looking and opening your eyes is just, I think it's a mistake. But I was working on them for my Art of Armenia book, and just taking a couple and doing a really, really close examination, what we call slow looking in art history, where you spend an hour just looking at this thing. And I was so amazed. It was the 1291 hodgkar from Goshavank, and I was just amazed at the level of complexity, and we're talking about not, in fact, physically, more than one level, multiple levels of carving of this minute, fretwork. And so, I agree. It's just extraordinary sophistication. And it makes me want to ask questions like, what did this mean? Yeah. What did it mean to stand in front of this and venerate? What were you thinking about? What were you meant to be thinking about? I think there are many ways to answer that question.
What the motivation was,
Yeah.
See, as an artist, same questions you're asking. Sometimes I'll look at them, and anything any artist ever makes, you always want to apply some sort of symbolism to it, right? Any sort of, even if it's corner of it or maybe the whole thing, but you have so much intricacy with these. And again, you touched on something about Irish crosses or cross stones. I've also realized that there's quite a similarity between a lot of the etching that you find on hodgkars and Celtic style.
Yes. The knots and the interlace and the weave. It's true. I am amazed, with the Armenian hodgkars. I always, the more I think about them, the more I think that there is, when you talk about sort of the meaning, that a lot of them, of course, are highly abstract, sometimes with no figures. And I think they're, I don't know, I'm just going to say this. I feel like that idea of looking at something that is so immensely complex, too complex really for you to comprehend in a moment or even more, but that is complex. It's complex, but you don't know how complex exactly. That was meant to be a metaphor for the divine. That itself, that idea that standing in front of you is this almost unknowable thing, right? Is I think very powerful. So, I'm a huge hodgkar fan too.
Never looked at it that way in terms of the complexity of the divine.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, and there are, when I think again of this 1291, I mean, you get big organized units, like maybe it's the roundel at the bottom, of course the cross and sometimes borders, but that's understandable. But then when you start thinking about all the knots and all the tiny, tendrils or weavings, my cat is now getting involved, that's beyond you. So that there's, in some ways it's simple, in some ways it's much, just unimaginably complex.
Yeah, and this kind of segues me into my next question or topic. I mean, most of these are made, if not all of them, are made of tuftkar, right? A lot of them are. And visiting the region, anybody who's ever been to the region enough sees, even in modern day, a lot of the architecture, even in Turkey. I've been to Turkey, I've been to Georgia. I'm sure you visited all of these sites plenty of times. You see even modern architecture still using tuftkar because it's so abundant in the area, right?
Yeah.
And it's a soft, porous stone that you can work off of. Was this, with some of your studies that you've done with some of the fortresses in Van and with Erebuni, and we can move into talking about some of the bigger structures, was this also the same thing that was used in the architecture as well, in some of the fortresses, even dating all the way back then,
Yeah. I mean, I think that the volcanic stone, tuff stone, basalt were used for the fortresses. I think, it also depends on where. So in Kilikia, we have some different kinds of, I think there's some more limestone used, like I think of Romkla. But for the most part, it's that incredibly plentiful volcanic stone that's quarried and used. And then we can't forget too that that in the pre-Christian period, we have more evidence for what's called Cyclopean masonry, which is not mortar core, but it's solid blocks of stone that are huge. But then with the medieval period, you start seeing what's called rubble masonry, which is where you get the stones as kind of facing stones with a core of rubble and mortar that's incredibly strong. So strong that you can remove, and you see this if you've been to, Western Armenia, you've seen where they've removed the facing stones from, or tried to remove facing stones, but the building still stands because the core is actually functioning as a structural member. It's that strong. It's like pozzolana concrete.
Has like layers and layers.
Yeah, and it's just like it's just incredibly strong and obviously also resilient when it comes to seismic events. So that's I think one of the reasons that we have so many standing churches and monasteries.
That's something we talked about. Yeah, it's amazing how the way they designed it, and we're comparing to nowadays, especially in California, when they build buildings, with the spring system for it to sway. They obviously realize that there's earthquakes in that region, and the way they designed it based on weight and how they put the layers together for it to sustain itself.
Yeah, it's shocking with all the seismic activity that even we've learned through history that have happened in that area. More of the architecture hasn't been leveled.
Well, it's so interesting because I think it's true that the architects were very aware of earthquakes. They studied failure and they made empirical studies to determine how to improve. So we have the example of Trădat, the architect who goes to Hagia Sophia and who ends up repairing the dome of the Hagia Sophia after there were a lot of earthquakes in the latter 10th century. So he repairs that dome. And then he also, in Armenia, he studies the ruins of Zvartnots, which had already collapsed by the time he studied those and then built a copy of Zvartnots in Ani, the Church of Gagik, or the Gregory Church. So here we know this from a text that tells us that's what he did, which is very rare to have information about an architect in the Middle Ages period, because we don't, that wasn't a period where you have individual artists. It's not like now with Van Gogh or whatever. There were master masons, but these were artisans. They weren't, but occasionally you'll get mentions of Trădat and Manuel, the architect of Ahtamar. But what's so striking about Trădat is that we know he made a study of structural failure. We know he did that. And we know he worked at Hagia Sophia, which failed. So it's an incredible thing to get that kind of insight into building practice and into, the stabilization. How do you stabilize a building? How do you build a building that succeeds instead of fails?
Wow, it's still mind blowing to me. I mean, especially with, not to touch on a dark topic, but 1988 earthquake. Was it 88 or 89? 88, right?
88.
It caused so much damage in Leningrad and Spitak, and
yes,
you kind of wonder, right?
I know.
Like, how many of these stood the test of time, and then in the modern day, again, not to touch on a dark topic, but it's so interesting to me.
The Soviet buildings didn't do as well, right?
They really didn't.
Yeah, it tells you something, doesn't it? It's really interesting, and I think hopefully we'll keep learning. But that empirical process, which really guided builders, is I think we owe a lot to that passing on of traditional knowledge and memory from the past.
Well, hopefully, just the art form of hodgkars and everything. Hopefully, it's continuing to pass on generation to generation. Let's talk a bit about the churches and monasteries. We immediately think about the city of 1001 churches, which is Ani. If you can talk a bit about Ani specifically and why so many churches were built during this time.
Yeah, sure. So Ani, it's important to note, was an important site, or it was a settlement already before the Christian era, and if you've been there, it's a dramatic site that has natural protection on two sides. So it's sort of like you think about Garni and the way that's situated. It's one of these kind of just naturally defended sites. So. And we do have anecdotal evidence for artifacts from before the Christian period. But then in the Christian period, it was part of the Kamsarakan dynasty's terrain. There's debate over what parts of Ani are pre-royal, but then in the royal period, so in the 10th, 11th centuries, when Ani was the capital of the royal Bagartuni dynasty, then we have the construction of a whole bunch of churches, and that continues into the 13th century. I think that part of the reason for the impulse to build can be that can be explained or can be not explained exactly, but is reflected in the inscriptions and that talk about who was building what. So we know, for example, the very rich merchant in the 13th century, Tigran Honenz, built a church at Ani that really reflects his immense wealth and his profit made off of the silk trade. And we also see, of course, the cathedral, which was a royal patronage. So the number of churches is a testament to the wealth of the city, but it's also, again, thinking about why things are built, you reading the inscriptions and sort of wondering about them, they're built, almost every donation inscription it's built for the salvation of the donor, so, and the donor's family. So, we can imagine that if you think about sort of social practices, that was something that royals did, like Queen Katramide built the Cathedral of Ani after her husband died. She continued it and finished it. Then you have other elites who maybe wanted to also, build something and have someone remember them by it. And so we have other churches that are also in Ani, all around Ani, that are doing it. So I think there are a bunch of things. I think it's clearly political. It's a display of wealth and power. It's a display of piety. But there's also, I'm sure, this idea that of the usefulness of having a place where monks and priests are praying for you after your death, in perpetuity. Those are, I think, some of the reasons why you see all those churches. But it also, I think, has to do with the fact that it was an urban place. It was a highly densely populated place starting in the 10th century. And so one needs, churches for the communities, and not just churches above ground, but of course, churches also carved into the rock.
Yeah.
Another interesting question would be like, well, how many people went to what church on what day? I would love to know that kind of information. How many of these churches were private, and how many of them were open to
that would be
larger
interesting.
Communities?
Yeah.
Well, that also shows the population that lived there. How massive it was that they had this many.
Well, that, and I mean, you can imagine, because it was in more or less the center of the Silk Road, right, or passageway. A lot of people probably, practiced their faith at the time, kind of, going through the area during their, merchant days and merchant lives. Yeah,
there's a wonderful story that I'll just tell you not because it's directly related, because it's interesting. So in the early 20th century, around in the late 19th or early 20th century, a Prince Maximilian of Saxony actually goes to Ani, and he prays in the Church of Tigran Honans. He celebrates a Latin Mass in the Church of Tigran Honans and prays for, the Armenians there. And it's just such an interesting image of this guy from Freiburg, who is a prince, not just a guy, who is celebrating a Latin Mass in that church of Tigran Honans. So, but you can imagine how filled in the Middle Ages those churches were with singing and processions from church to church. And the relics too. So one thing that I've actually just started noticing is we have really good photos taken by drones of the site around the cathedral. And the cathedral had all these chapels all around it. They don't survive anymore, but we see the imprints of them in the ground, particularly if you look east of the cathedral. All around were chapels that were dedicated to monks or were funerary sites for monks. The relics of Saint Ripsime were actually transferred to Ani, and we think we know where they were kept east of the cathedral in like a little round church. So there were so many more than what we know. I mean, maybe not 1,001, but the point is that, we have to imagine how built up this city was with churches, and that they functioned not just as envelopes for the liturgy, but they functioned as real points on like you would think about like what that would look like to see so many pointed cupolas and domes in that space. It would have really, I think, created this sense of the density of sacred spaces at Ani, just incredibly densely religious place, but also with houses, also with shops, baths, it's when you go, it's wonderful to think about that past.
Now, you mentioning with the drone shots and having that kind of like the outline of what used to be, the condition of the churches right now, is there any cooperation with archaeologists to help in preserving what's left of it?
Yes. So, and it's ongoing with Ani. Ani is unusual in the context of the Republic of Turkey, in that there has been now sustained attention and internationally sort of accepted preservation being done at the site. I've been involved with that for many years now, and hopefully will continue to be. There's work that's been done at the Church of Surpregich, which is one that is famous because it's kind of half standing. It's a rotunda that's half standing, and where there's stabilization and actually some reconstruction with the collaboration of Masons from the Republic of Armenia. So it is an unusual example of collaboration between Turks and Armenians, and between the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism and the World Monuments Fund, which is an American NGO that is prestigious and sort of internationally highly regarded. So for the most part, that's not the case with Armenian churches that are in Turkey, but Ani is, of course, in so many ways, it's unique. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as of 2016.
And that was going to be a little follow-up question to that, was how are the Turks cooperating? And again, this isn't my attempt to smear or cause any issues, but I've always wondered, I've always been curious, even as a little boy. It's like you learn more and more about it, and you hear more and more about it. Okay, so what are, on the Turkish side of things, what are they doing? Are they being cooperative? Are they not being cooperative?
Yeah, I think first of all, I'll say that when we talk about them, what we're talking about really, the decision makers are the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. Mm-hmm. So as much as there are, plenty of people that I work with that are, that we can have back and forth, all that. I don't, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, they're the ones who are making the decisions. Mm-hmm. And so, and they are highly bureaucratic and fairly opaque. But that's where you need people like the World Monuments Fund who know how to sort of talk to that world. So what I've noticed, and I'll only speak to my own experience, is that you have to work carefully. You have to be very aware of, what they might be thinking and how they might be thinking. For example, with Surpregich, there was a real concern about stones falling on workers who were working in the church, because if you know that church, again, it's half there. When you start moving the stones around underneath, you're destabilizing something that is very fragile. And so it was a kind of, I think, learning curve for everyone to realize, if there are workers there in that space, you're going to have to be really careful. And so there was the decision to build a scaffolding to sort of stop stones from falling directly on top of people. I mean, that's one example, but it's not easy. It's not easy to work with them, but it's possible. And so what I always tell myself, because it gets really complicated working on an Armenian monument whose legal owners, it's the Republic of Turkey. I always think, well, what's best for the monument? I don't care about scoring points. I'm not a prognosticator. I can't solve world peace. But what I can do is put the monument first, so that when I'm gone, and when my students, or when future generations are able to visit, it can still be there, and nobody's like making stuff up. Yeah. First and foremost, it has to be about the integrity of the monument, and that I put above everything else. So if that's standing, the monument's in good health, I'm happy, and I don't worry about too much else. That keeps it very simple for me.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good approach when it comes to protecting. I mean, not just our culture, but all over the world. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's been border shifting for thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we really have to teach people to respect old things, whether it's, an antique or whether it's a monument, but this stuff has been around for a lot longer than we have. And with any luck, it will continue to be. But pay it the respect that it deserves, whatever culture it belongs to. And I feel that very strongly with the Armenian material, which isn't just, of course, about beautiful things, but these are archives that are on walls. So there's a lot at stake. When a wall comes down, that archive is gone, and you may have wonderful records of it going back to the 19th century, but you don't have that archive anymore. It's completely compromised. So yeah, it's a kind of funny thing working with preservation of Armenian churches. It's so urgent. It's, an earthquake could happen any day, and a lot of these monuments are in emergency condition. At the same time, it's incredibly complicated to get anything done. So it's a real, it's
what a catch-22, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Now, are they trying to, when you say preservation, are they trying to kind of restructure it so it can withstand an earthquake or anything? Or
they are.
Okay.
When I go there to Ani and thereabouts in that region, we travel with a seismologist who actually specializes in that shaking table kind of experimentation where you, right? So they are. So that work is being done. I mean, not to say that there would be radical changes to the monuments, because the goal is always to,
That was my concern. Are they going to change things around?
No. Okay. I mean, I think that, no, there won't be that but there will be an attempt to stabilize, to accommodate for seismicity. But the goal is always to uphold international standards of preservation. And now because Ani is a UNESCO site, that's really even more, crucial and important to abide by, so that there will be minimal change to the medieval structure, only what is necessary to stabilize. In the case of Srpgic, the half church, that is going to be somewhat rebuilt because it's so compromised as just a half church, and it has been deteriorating in ways that are not necessarily obvious to if you're just looking at it, but when you start studying it, you can see cracks getting wider, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, there is more work going on to complete it, but that's because of that is actually a stabilization, because left to its own devices, it wouldn't be able to stand.
Yeah. It's good to hear about that, because I mean, like I said, I haven't done enough research myself to understand the political side of things. I mean, I know there's restoration going on, but never really dove into, who's cooperating, who's not cooperating. And again, right. I'm not trying to single out the Turkish side of things.
No.
This is just look, collectively.
Right. I'll say bad restoration is not knows no particular. I mean, anybody can do it, and it happens everywhere. Yeah. Bad restoration.
Yes, it happens.
It's not limited to anybody. So I think really the most important point is to ensure that these monuments stand, and that's absolutely. I mean, that's the heartbreaking thing with what we've seen in Artsakh and Nakhchivan. Because once they're gone forever, and that's it. It's just a picture. It's maybe an old photograph, but you don't have it anymore. So that's the most important thing for me, anyway. Well, I mean, everybody has their own important things. That's fine.
Of course, but when you're trying to get in touch with your roots and trying to understand more about almost everything that's all encompassing in terms of art, architecture, history, kingdoms, kings, queens, etc.
Yeah.
With any particular type of history, you can't lose sight of, I guess, the fact that we inherit these things, but tend to not want to, not deep dive, but even just kind of peel off a couple layers and understand more about them, right?
Yeah.
And that would kind of lead me into my next question would be, how important is that for anybody, even on a surface level? You don't have to be a scholar or anybody like that. And, it's kind of what we're trying to do here, Vic and I, is shed light on topics like these and maybe peel off those layers and have people kind of spark an interest. In your opinion, like How do you approach that, especially with some of your students who are non-Armenian, and now you turn that into bring that towards Armenians,
right.
And how important would that be?
Yeah, I'll speak from my own experience and say, I was never studious. I got bored very easily, and I think that, and I failed so many times, like failing, big things, big exams. Like I've always felt that I was kind of the dumb one. And I have to say that so much of learning and curiosity is about feeling like you are confident enough to be curious. Like, why not ask? Like, okay, yeah, this thing is ancient, but why not ask, like, who made it and where was it exactly? And so often part of, I think, a way to get students excited is to make clear, like, how much we just don't know, and how much, like, any kind of speculation is useful speculation. You don't have to have read like a million books in order to ask basic questions. And so often it's the most basic questions that don't get asked. I see this over and over again. I often tell my students, the most famous monuments are often the ones that nobody's worked on. You think, so much has been done on the Hagia Sophia or Ani Cathedral. And then lo and behold, you find something basic that's been staring you in the face and you've never even seen it. So I really try to stress to students and anybody who will listen how, be confident that you know enough to ask questions and to wonder about things. Because if you do just a little bit, the monuments return back to you and the images return back to you so much. They talk back almost immediately to you, and they'll talk to you and tell you things. Yeah. Just, be open to it and don't worry about not knowing this or that. None of us know everything.
And that's one of the intimidating factors with anything. Like sometimes you come across people that know so much about so many different things, and you kind of feel sheltered, or like you back off and you feel intimidated. It's happened to me a million times. Again, we're not scholars. We're just trying to find out more, like everyone else. We're on this journey with everybody else. And sometimes when you in the past, not maybe now, but you come across somebody who's a little bit more intimidating with so much information, and you're like, okay, that's it. This isn't for me.
I know. Listen, that's what academics are like, period. I mean, that's my life, right? And I've always felt a little bit like, well, that's not me, and I try to be really honest about, saying, look, I'm not that person. I can't, be pompous about this, and I won't pretend I'm the smartest person in the room. That's not interesting to me. I'd much rather be, looking at a hodgkar, and thinking about the past. That's interesting. And I think it's interesting for most people if they just, let themselves do it in a way, and don't be worried about what you don't know, and don't be worried about asking questions that reveal your own ignorance, because, it's just you're losing out, and life is short. So
I think also we ourselves tend to put these people on that kind of a pedestal, like you said, as far as pompous, there's and that's what makes us nervous. We feel like we're not good enough, or we're not educated enough. So, and then once you start talking to these people, and we've experienced this from being nervous, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, we can talk to this person. We can ask questions.
Yeah. And not only that, you might, I'm just going to say this, you might be smarter than they are. Who knows? Like, you know what I mean? It's not about, it's so much about a kind of theater of, the great academic, the professor, the Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Not always. And obviously people have learning and all that, and that's great. And very, one respects it. But at the same time, a lot of it, it can be a defense mechanism. It can simply be a learned behavior that's worked in the past. I'm not, for me, I find that really boring and not interesting. And I like to poke people like that by asking them really basic questions that are like, wait, because I used to also be afraid. I used to be so afraid of saying anything that might reveal that I don't know, enough. And now I realize nobody ever knows enough. Yeah. We don't know enough. Nobody does. And if anybody pretends they do, they're full of it. It's nobody knows everything.
It also has to do a little bit with our current social environment with social media and everything, because there's so much information that is out there with just like 30-second snippets. So people read it and then they think they know everything, you know. So I think, but if you actually research and learn 20% of what you're trying to, you know, ask the question about, I think you'll be more comfortable. But the greatest question, especially in history, is why? That's all you have to say.
Absolutely.
Why? Which will open up everything else. Everything else will just automatically start by just saying why. That's it.
Exactly. And it makes you ask, how do you know what you know? You know, why do you know that? You know, what are all the things that came to even make you ask that question? It's a wonderful thing to have a brain and to use it to confront something. And everybody has one. So it's a great thing.
It is. Well, I think we're out of questions, right?
We are out of questions.
Dr. Maranci, do you have anything you want to mention, cover, or think maybe we might have missed?
One thing. So I am doing a show together with my students at Tufts called Connecting Thread Survivor Objects. And it's a small show of Armenian liturgical textiles from the Armenian Museum in Watertown and also from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's a beautiful show of 18th and 19th century liturgical textiles. And if you just go to like Tufts Art Gallery on the internet, you can find it. And it's going to be really beautiful. It's going to be on from September to December, but there'll also be an online component. But it's a wonderful chance to look at vestments and liturgical curtains from places that sometimes those churches, in almost all those cases, those churches are not functioning. They're either in the former Ottoman Empire. One example from Nakhchivan. So it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's just a whole other dimension of really interesting stuff.
If anybody's in the area of Boston or just in Massachusetts, they can visit. Or
absolutely.
Is it open to the public?
It's open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we take a trip to Boston?
You never know. We'll see how these. Let's wait and see how. Yep. There you go. Road trip. I do want to mention her book again. You can find it again. It's called The Art of Armenia: An Introduction. It is on Amazon. I've ordered it. I've been ordering so many books lately.
You really have.
Yeah, I've ordered it. I haven't received it yet, but I just definitely once I get it, I will dive into it and learn a lot more. So again, that's on Amazon. You can definitely order it and just support this whole great, everything that she is doing. We need to support more Armenians like this, and to
thank you so much.
No problem. I do want to mention about our. We when it comes to our website, we have that new promotion. A lot of people have been asking about it with our sculptures. If you go to merherosner.com, you can, if you want to buy both sculptures, the collectibles, you will get a free t-shirt and a mug of your choice. Also, don't forget that $30 from each sculpture goes to miasin.org. They are the organization that is helping the displaced soldiers' families from the recent war, and that is miasin, miaseen.org. You can go there and donate whatever you can, but again, we will be donating $30 from each sculpture to them. Let's see, what else? Is there anything we missed?
I think that covers everything.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Christina Maranci, thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And hopefully we'll have you, on a future show and talk about, more in detail. So,
wonderful. Thank you both.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah. So everyone, thanks for listening. Till the next episode. Take care.